Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. It is April 17th, Wednesday, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the transfer portal. A ton of names have already jumped in only less than 36 hours into this window, so I want to break down where we're at right now and kind of where we could be going over the next couple of days. Then I want to get to the story about Dion and the 6 teams he is quote-unquote allowing Travis Hunter and his 2 sons to be drafted by. Kind of want to break down that decision, my thoughts on it, and just break down everything I have thoughts on that about. And then Michigan accepted some punishments about the COVID-19 recruiting violations. Obviously, this is not necessarily the case that is going to catch the most people's eyes, but definitely some things to pull away from that. And we'll look forward to the big-time case of the sign stealing that will be going down here pretty soon. And then we'll finish it off with a Spotlight Wednesday, and today we were talking about the Kansas State Wildcats, so definitely stay tuned for that. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here, you can ask something that I hadn't brought up, or you can just leave a comment that I hadn't brought up. You can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a little bit of fun here, make this a little bit more of an interactive show for you all. But again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, because the transfer portal has been open for less than 36 hours now, and there are plenty of names in there already, and it looks like it's only going to build. More and more big names have been starting to kind of file in, but let's break down kind of where we're at right now and where we could be going in the future. But let's start with the big board. So this is something that I absolutely will be updating throughout this process as more and more guys start to enter the portal and more big-time players or these guys commit, and I kind of break that down for you all as well. But at quarterback, let's start there and kind of make our way through the positions here. Quarterback is not necessarily the strongest group as of right now. As we talked about yesterday, quarterback is not going to be a position of a big need for a lot of these teams. It's going to be a lot of guys getting picked up as kind of backups or rotational guys. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of if there is a big-time quarterback out there to be had. I think there's plenty of talent out there to be had, but the talent tends to be younger players or it's older players who haven't played very much. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there. But right now you have Jacoby Criswell, who came from Arkansas. Sounds like Taven Green, the transfer from Boise State, is knocking down that quarterback job over there in Fayetteville. Then you have Ja'Cory Brown from Miami, a very talented kid that played a little bit in the Pinstripe Bowl, just never quite found the field, and especially with Cam Ward coming into town, had very little chance to be the starter for them this upcoming year. And then Nick Evers, a guy that started his career at Oklahoma, then went to Wisconsin, and was just kind of stuck behind a couple of really experienced quarterbacks. So all these guys are plenty talented kids, definitely have some ability to them, but I wouldn't necessarily say there's a Power 5 starting job out there for him. Now, Jacoby Criswell is the one that I'm watching probably the most closely because I think he probably has the highest upside of the group. But at the end of the day, I think more guys will definitely join, and maybe some things could get mixed up as we go on here. But for the time being, the quarterback group, while a solid group of names, not necessarily the big-time names that could be starters this upcoming year necessarily. But running back group is a very fun group, to be totally honest with you. This is the one we talked about yesterday. Chris Hummer said it's going to have the most big names, and it's living up to that right now. Damian Martinez is the biggest name on this list. He has plenty of people after him. He has locked in visits to Arizona, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Miami. It sounds like Miami is mainly the team to watch there, but Tennessee and Kentucky, I think, will not be very far behind here. Mississippi State has been a team that Chris Hummer tabbed to maybe surprise some people, so who knows what happens there, but that's the big guy there at that position, definitely the guy that kind of sets the pace for everyone else. But then you add guys like Henry Parrish from Miami, Andrew Paul from Georgia, and Dallin Hayden from Ohio State, along with Trevante Citizen from Miami. I think you have a ton of talent. Obviously, two of those guys coming from Miami shows you what Miami needs at that running back position. So Damian Martinez will definitely be getting plenty of calls from Mario Cristobal and company. But let's move on to wide receivers, and this is kind of an interesting group that I think will slowly get more and more interesting. I think this is likely the group that will have the most outright talent on it, to be totally honest with you, just because some guys get stuck behind really, really talented guys. You know, we saw it with Julian Fleming at Ohio State, made his way over to Penn State. And one of these guys on here is a Penn State guy. But let's start with Justice Ross Simmons from Colorado State. He is a big name to watch. He is one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the portal right now. Now, Keandre Lambert-Smith is not too far behind him. If not, you know, you could definitely have him as the number one guy. But I think he has set up visits to a couple of different places. I know Georgia has reached out. I know a couple other big-time schools. I believe Auburn is one of the others that reached out. I'd be a little bit surprised if Georgia went fully after Keandre Lambert-Smith, but who knows? You know, you never can have too many weapons around there, so it'll be interesting to see how that one develops. You also have Tyler Williams, who came from UGA, was a very talented kid coming out of high school, and then Raymond Cottrell, a guy that was at Texas A&M to start the offseason, transferred to Kentucky, and decided he was not very happy there, so is back in the transfer portal. So it'll be interesting to see what the market is for him. Obviously, you know, you're a little bit wary of the kids that bounce around to that degree, but at the end of the day, a very talented kid that, if you put him in the right situation, I'm sure could thrive very efficiently for sure. But then you look at tight end, and it's not a lot of guys. Eli Stowers, who actually started his career as a quarterback at Texas A&M, now is at New Mexico State as a tight end. He's really the only big-time name to know right now. I'm sure that will change very, very quickly over the next couple of days. But as of right now, Eli Stowers is kind of the guy to watch. I believe he's going on a visit to Vandy here pretty soon. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But this is a position that I expect to fill out a little bit more and at least get some bigger names in it as we go through this portal period. But let's finish off the offense with offensive line, and this one's kind of loaded, to be totally honest with you. You have Caden Proctor, who has officially entered the portal. He's coming from Iowa. He will be going to Bama, almost definitely. He was put in the portal with a no-contact tag, which essentially just means no one is allowed to make contact with him. He is only allowed to reach out to teams, which likely means he's reaching out to Bama and setting up pretty much when he can move in next. So it'll be interesting to see if anything goes awry there and some other teams find their way in. But for the time being, I think he's definitely finding his way back to Tuscaloosa. You also have Peyton Kirkland, a very, very talented kid from Texas that just was in a room that was just remarkably talented, although he seemed to be kind of making a push to be able to start possibly in 2025. So definitely a guy with high upside, and a lot of guys will be after him. Jansen Zandamela is another guy just like that. He was the top interior offensive lineman in this class, but has already entered the portal from USC, so it'll be really interesting to see if someone picks him up. There are plenty of people that need interior offensive line help across the country, so he'll have a big-time market. There's no two ways about that. You have Savion Washington from Colorado, who's someone to watch. I think he started most of the games last year for them. They also lost Isaiah Jada, the other tackle from Colorado that started most of the games. And it's kind of hard to conceptualize how big of a deal that is with how poor the offensive line was a year ago at Colorado. But at the end of the day, losing those guys as even rotational pieces is not necessarily ideal for Colorado. And definitely some teams will be after him because those are big dudes that can definitely play some good football. And two guys that are kind of big players in this. Andrew Chambly is a guy to definitely watch coming out of Arkansas. He set up visits to SMU, UCLA, Kansas State, and Colorado. So Colorado's already trying to replace some of those guys that have walked out the door. I believe he's still setting up visits for Virginia Tech and Maryland. So this will be a rather long process. He's one of the most highly coveted guys in this group. Obviously, Caden Proctor would be if he was actually up for grabs, but Andrew Chambly is definitely a guy to watch. And then Marcus Bryant is a big-time player at offensive tackle. He has been crystal balled to Washington already, but was an absolute beast at SMU, and plenty of people will be after him. So until he signs that paper, it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, because he definitely has huge upside, and a team like Alabama needs some help at offensive tackle for sure. So it'll be really interesting to see how those names develop, because there's a lot of really talented guys there that could jump in and start for you pretty much immediately. So I'll definitely be watching O-line very, very closely. D-line is another one that's kind of filled out a little bit faster than I think people thought. CJ West, in my opinion, is the best player of this group. He was a big-time player at Kent State a year ago, was an all-MAC selection, and just an absolute beast on the inside. He plays, A and B gap, so really that normal, defensive tackle type build is an absolute beast, and someone that plenty of teams will be after. We talked about how big of a deal defensive tackle is for these teams going into this year, and there'll be plenty going after CJ West, I'm sure. Jermaine Lowell, another guy from Louisville, is a really, really good pickup to have. Chaz Wallace from Colorado is another one. Bill Norton from Arizona is the one that it feels like things are starting to move in one direction, and that's in the direction of Austin, Texas. It feels like Bill Norton is kind of gearing up to commit to Texas. He is going to be on campus for their spring game this weekend, and we'll see what happens from there. But that's really the only team I've heard when talking about Bill Norton. So it'll be really interesting to see if he lands there. It would be a great fit for both of the parties. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next week with that one. But plenty of talent at this position already. I think it'll only get better. There's plenty of teams that need defensive tackles, which means there are plenty of guys across the country that right now might not be planning to go to the portal that will be getting calls that might convince them to go into the portal. But we'll figure that out, and we'll get to that as we kind of go on here. But let's move on to edge rushing, and this is kind of a fun group as well. Nigel Kelly is kind of the big fish here. He's the one that I think everyone is kind of going after, a 6'6", kind of beast that can do a ton of different things in the run game, in the pass game. Just was, behind Ruben Bain, who I think is going to be one of the best edge rushers in the entire country this upcoming year. And then you have a couple really, really talented kids right behind him. Billy Walton from Texas is someone to watch. Never quite got on the field at Texas, but a very talented kid coming out of high school that I think a lot of people will be after. Anthony Dunn Jr. from Florida A&M is another guy to watch. He was a huge player for them last year. Pretty much was an entire game wrecker that entire conference. So he's someone definitely to watch as more and more teams get involved. Dave Harris from Colorado also jumped in, another Colorado guy that has jumped in. And Dayon Haynes from Pitt is another one. Pitt feels like they've gotten hit a little bit here early on, as well as Colorado. Those are the two teams that I've noticed the most, I feel like, going through this. Also, Miami has lost a number of guys, so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of rebuild those groups. But edge rushing especially, I think, will continue to build out, whether it's, outside linebackers or true edge rushers. I think there will be plenty of guys that can rush the passer on the market here pretty soon. Linebacker is two really, really solid guys. You have Solomon DeShields from Pitt, is someone that has been incredible for them the last couple of years, and definitely someone that will have a big-time market. And then Elijah Herring from Tennessee is probably the biggest name here. I mean, a leading tackler for Tennessee a year ago. Obviously, that defense is getting a ton better, but with someone like Elijah Herring walking out the door, not necessarily the ideal situation for the Vols, but this is one where there doesn't seem to be a ton of need across the country for linebackers, but at the end of the day, getting as much rotation at that position is really important, making sure guys' legs are fresh and everything. So there will be plenty of market for these guys. There will be plenty of teams knocking on their door, but at the end of the day, I don't know if there's any big-time starting positions open, at least unless these guys go in and steal it. With someone like Elijah Herring, it's definitely possible that he does that. But let's move on to the back end, and let's start with corner. The big name here is Cormani McClain. He was the top cornerback in the country in 2022, started his career at Colorado, started a couple of games, and had some off-field issues, in terms of maybe just not being as committed as Dion would have liked, just not quite fitting the program quite as nicely as I think everyone would have hoped. But at the end of the day, a very, very talented kid. Maybe a change of scenery will help him a lot, and I think everyone will be after this kid, to be totally honest, just because of the pure talent he has is just off the charts. But then you have Traquan Fagans from USC is a big-time name here. Cedric Hawkins, another guy from Ohio State that never quite found the field, but was stuck behind a ton of very talented kids, so he's obviously has some ability to him. And then Sam McCall's another one that never quite found the field, but is still very talented, who came out of high school very highly recruited, so plenty of guys will be after him as well. There will be plenty of people, especially at the corner position, I think, that will jump in throughout this process. I think there are plenty of big-time schools that need corners. Bama and Miami are the main two that come to mind, but plenty others. So it'll be interesting to see that fill out, especially just kind of this back end overall, although the safeties have gotten off to a pretty good start, to be totally honest with you. Jacoby Matthews is the big name here. He was part of that big-time 2021 A&M class. He has found a new place to play. Jaden Milliner-Jones is another guy to watch, as well as Miles Slusher. They both came from Colorado, so another two that have left Colorado over the last couple of days. But this is a really solid group right now. Jacoby Matthews is the guy. He's definitely someone that could be starting on most rosters across the country, so definitely the guy that I'm watching the closest here. But at the end of the day, Miles Slusher is very talented. Cedric Hawkins, I actually think, is a safety. I accidentally put him in the corner position, but plenty of talent at this position in the back end of this defense. So the teams that need to fill out that, the Miamis and the Bamas of the world, will have plenty to choose from, that's for sure. But as I talked about earlier, it feels like Colorado and Pitt, along with Miami, are teams that are getting hit the most, at least to start. I don't know how big of a deal the Colorado ones are, because some of those guys you don't necessarily need around, especially some of the offensive linemen. It's very possible that the guys that they brought in the winter portal had just beaten them out, and they are finding a new place to play. Pitt, it looks a little bit different. All of the guys that I've seen coming out of Pitt have, tons of stats behind them, have been starters for a couple of years, so a little bit more worrisome if you're Pittsburgh. They were in the middle of the storm of the NIL and transfer portal era when Jordan Addison made his way to USC, so maybe they're in the middle of it again. Who knows? But at the end of the day, I think hopefully all these teams can kind of find a level at some point and not have to worry about this all the way through, but definitely not the best start for those three teams for sure, but plenty of time to still build out this roster and make it a good portal era for them. But this is just the beginning. There will be plenty more to happen over the next couple of weeks, and we will keep you all updated as it comes. I think there's going to be some big-time names that come. I think the only one that's really shocked me thus far has been Cormani McLean, but I'm sure there will be plenty more to come that will shock me. But for the time being, we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Deion Sanders and the teams that he, quote-unquote, will allow to draft Shedeur Sanders, Shiloh, and Travis Hunter. So we will take a slight break, and then we will be back right with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal update, give you guys an idea of where we sit now and where we could be sitting in a couple of days here, but let's talk about Deion Sanders, and let's talk about his decision around Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders, and possibly Shiloh Sanders. I haven't seen him mentioned in these articles, but I'm sure this applies to him if it applies to Shedeur, but there have been rumblings that Deion Sanders was going to quote-unquote pull an Eli with Shedeur Sanders, and he was not going to any old team. He was going to be able to pick whatever team he wanted, and apparently Deion had some teams in mind. Now, initially he said he doesn't like the cold, which was a kind of a big-time moniker to put over teams that you don't want to go to, but overall, I mean, Sanders has projected in the past that Shedeur and Travis Hunter would be top 4 picks in the draft, which is very, very possible. Both those guys are incredibly talented, can do a number of remarkable things here, I think. But it seems like he has 6 teams in mind that are kind of the teams he will, the way he put it was, quote-unquote, allow them to draft his son and Travis Hunter. So those teams are the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys, the Commanders, the Ravens, and the Falcons. So all of the teams he played for, plus the Eagles. So that's kind of the wild card here. Not really sure how that got into the mix. Also not sure how that got into the mix with the not wanting to be in the cold, because Philly gets pretty cold. But at the end of the day, a good franchise that definitely is well run. So makes a little bit of sense. But I think everyone, when this news dropped, had some questions. Everyone has a big opinion on Deion whenever anything comes out. And this was one that I think people were especially aggressive about. This is one no one was very popular of. Now, I'm a Falcons fan, so I'm not necessarily as mad as the rest of everyone, but at the end of the day, I do have a number of questions. And they start with, what does allow mean? Like, in real time, what does him allowing all these kids who are over the age of 18, over the age of 21, how is he going to allow them to do anything? Not necessarily to say, like, obviously Deion is Shedeur and Shiloh's father. He is more than welcome to give his advice, give his input, and, guide them in right directions, but he shouldn't be making the decision for them by any means. And Travis Hunter, I get that Deion is a big part of his life and a huge part of his development in this football game, but why would Deion have any say in where Travis Hunter ends up? Now, he's more than welcome to give his 2 cents. I totally believe that Deion giving his 2 cents is a good thing because he's been through this process. He knows what teams are great. He has tons of connections throughout the league, so he'd be goofy to not, at the very least, give his 2 cents to these kids and let them know which franchises kind of stand out to him. But at the end of the day, they can make whatever decision they like. So if Shedeur at the end, towards draft day, decides that he really likes the Arizona Cardinals or he really likes the Minnesota Vikings, whatever it is his father just going to step in and say, no, that wasn't on one of the 6 teams, that's just not how this works, and someone else is going to have to pick him up? Because I don't think that's the best thing for Shedeur. I definitely don't think it's the best thing for Shiloh or Travis, so it'll be really interesting to see this unfold. But my second question overall is just, what's kind of his plan of attack to make this happen? He's tabbed these 6 teams that are, for the most part, really solid teams that don't find themselves towards the top of the draft very often, to be totally honest. I think the earliest one here is, I guess the Commanders at 2 would be the obvious one, but they play some, 9-7 football at times, hang around in the NFC West or NFC East at times, and then Atlanta's at 8. So you have 2 top 10 teams, but the other 4 are very rarely towards the top of the draft because of how good they are. So I'm not sure exactly how this is going to happen in the first place, but they're both very talented kids. They both can be definitely sitting towards the top of the draft this time next year, and Deion has made that very, very clear. He said they were going anywhere from 1 to 4. He said One of them is going 1. The other one will go anywhere in front of 4, so 4 or above, which is lofty goals. Both those guys are capable of doing that. Shedeur would almost have to be the number 1 quarterback in the class for that to happen, but it's not necessarily out of the realm of possibility. The question is, even if Shedeur is one of the best quarterbacks in the draft, even if he's, sitting with Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck on draft night, and there's a little idea of who quarterback 1 is coming off the board, there's a real chance that some of these teams will just go on to Carson Beck or go on to Quinn Ewers because they have this, idea that Shedeur comes with Dion. Shedeur comes with a guy that is going to be watching you like a hawk and be very critical of your franchise every second he gets. So it'll be really interesting to see not only can Shedeur be the number 1 quarterback in this class, but can he be it by a little bit of a margin? Because I think he's already kind of hurt himself with this kind of talk of, knocking off 26 teams to start the process is not necessarily the best way to start your NFL career in general, but also the gap has to be huge for these teams to overlook that. The gap has to be so substantial that they're like, that is definitely QB1. There is no question in my mind, and I'm willing to take on all of the stuff that comes with it, because let's be honest, there is a lot of stuff that comes with the Deion Sanders family, and it's not necessarily all bad. I don't think Deion is necessarily, a guy that's going after anyone, but at the end of the day, it comes with a lot of stuff that some people just don't want to deal with. And it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of develops and what teams are, how teams are kind of reacting to this and how they kind of deal with it. I think Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders have very, very long NFL careers ahead of them. They are both very talented kids that can do really anything they want in this football world, but them possibly being in a position to either just outright deny teams and not hear teams out throughout the draft process, or possibly demand a trade if one of these teams ends up drafting them, it's just not the right way to start your NFL career. And hopefully, I guess, it lines up to where one can get taken by the Cowboys and one can get taken by the Falcons and they can get on rolling, but you never know that that's going to happen. And especially, it's very likely that it doesn't happen, because it's very likely that other teams around the nation aren't necessarily as concerned about this rule that Deion has set as other people are. I think it's very possible that one of these teams just drafts Travis Hunter and says, if he wants to request a trade, he can, but we're going to get, first of all, a haul for him, hopefully, and he's going to start his career kind of as the guy that requests trades. It's never the guy that you want to be, especially when you're just walking into the league. So while I fully understand Deion is one of the most influential people in the entire sport, whether it's college football or the NFL, I know that he can get his message out there to pretty much any team that he needs to, especially the teams that he formerly played for, but I just don't know if that's something that is going to fly with everyone around the NFL. I don't know that that's something that Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders would really want to follow through on. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to see this all unfold. I think there's so many moving factors in all of this, and one of my big concerns that I kind of touched on a little bit earlier was he has these 6 teams in mind, and Deion Sanders has incredible amounts of knowledge about how these different organizations work and how these kids work in particular with his sons, and Travis Hunter. He knows them incredibly well, and I'm sure he's doing this in the best interest of those kids. I don't think he's ever trying to, exploit them in any way or put them in any bad situation. So I don't think he's doing any of this to, gain power or do anything like that. But I do think there is an idea that he has 6 teams. Does Shedeur have the same 6 teams? Does Travis have the same 6 teams? Does Shiloh have the same 6 teams? And can Shiloh even have 6 teams to is he going to be afforded that luxury of being able to cross off 26 teams from the get-go? I don't think he will. So it'll be interesting to see this develop. I think it's very possible that as we go through this draft process, that list of teams kind of grows and grows, especially for Travis Hunter and Shiloh Sanders. I think you just have to hear the teams out. Crossing off 26 teams and saying, I'm not even willing to hear your pitch, is just not a good way to start your NFL career. You could be going to the wrong team that is not the right fit for you. You could be going to a team that feels comfortable but isn't the place that you'll thrive the most. So overall, I think this is mostly a crazy idea. While I fully believe that Deion is doing this, trying to put these kids in the best situation possible, I don't know if he fully knows what the best situation is until we get to draft time, until we get to hear all the pitches from these coaches and everything, and let those kids make their decisions. So while Deion has his sights set on those 6 teams, I would be very surprised if all 3 of those guys, or even these 2 guys, Shadur and Travis Hunter, end up on one of those 6 teams. I bet at least 1 or 2 of these guys end up on different teams, and I'm sure Deion will be more than fine with it, because the draft process is really weird, and some of the franchises you think you'll love going in, you don't end up loving. Some you think you're going to hate, you end up loving. So I think it's more just about letting these kids hear out their options, because they're going to be very talented kids, and a lot of people are going to be after him. Let him hear out their options, let him go through the process, and then give your 2 cents where it's due. But crossing off 26 teams to start the entire process, not necessarily the best message to send to the NFL. But at the end of the day, Deion does stuff differently, and hard to argue with him for that. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Michigan. We have the first case that they have been under has been resolved, it seems, and there are some punishments that come with it. So I want to break down where Michigan sits and what kind of the next big-time case is going to look like right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoots and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Deion Sanders story where he had tabbed 6 teams that are quote-unquote allowed to draft his kids and Travis Hunter, and gave my thoughts about that. But let's jump into some Michigan talk. And Michigan has officially been hit with some recruiting violation punishments, and it sounds like they're, not too aggressive, to be totally honest with you. So Michigan's been in some hot water with the NCAA for quite some time. Now, we're all kind of waiting on the sign stealing investigation to start. That's the one that everyone is really locking in on. But there was another one that happened during COVID. They had recruiting violations, and they had kids on campus when they weren't supposed to, too many coaches on the field at times. And on top of all that, Jim Harbaugh was not too inclined to cooperate with the investigation, which we'll get to here in a second. But it sounds like Michigan and 5 former staffers have reached an agreement with the NCAA Committee of Infractions for penalties with this ongoing, COVID recruiting violations. And the violations involve illicit recruiting, coaching during the 2019 dead period, as we talked about. And the notice of allegations came in December from the NCAA. So the NCAA released a statement regarding this, and they kind of zeroed in on a couple of different things. And one of the big things that everyone was kind of unpacking was in this statement, they said that Michigan admitted that one of the the head coach in particular, did not it was essentially a failure of his role to not cooperate with the investigation. Obviously, referring to Jim Harbaugh now, he was never referred to by name in this piece because he is the one coach that declined to negotiate a resolution process, and so that one's still very much open, and there is a ton that will go into that we'll get into a little bit later here, but just an idea of what violations they were under. Four level 2 violations regarding staffers, along with a level 1 violation with Jim Harbaugh. So a lot of different stuff going around. Now, I'm not fully sure exactly how aggressive these were, but they were texting during the dead period, had analysts on the field, that type of thing, and we're just not doing the things that the NCAA had asked them to do during that COVID period that, to be totally honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if other teams were doing it as well, but not necessarily the point here, I guess. But yeah, we talked about how not cooperating was a failure of the head coaching duties, according to the NCAA, and Michigan agreed to that. So it sounds like Michigan, to be totally honest with you, was just trying to get this done and over with and kind of let this go in the rearview mirror, at least for them, not necessarily for Jim Harbaugh. But the penalties they will be facing is Michigan will serve a 3-year probation. They will have to pay a fine and face recruiting restrictions, which is a huge part of this. Not necessarily sure what those recruiting restrictions would be. It might be scholarships. It might be number of offers. It might be number of visits. Not exactly sure, but that'll be interesting to watch. And then the coaches will face a 1-year show cause order, which essentially just means you have to be willing to show at any time the conversations you have with recruits, the phone calls, basically just make sure that everything is above board as they go through those recruiting conversations. And the thing about that is none of those coaches, except for Sherrone Moore actually is one of the coaches involved in this, none of those are on the Michigan staff besides Sherrone Moore. So this is not necessarily as big of a deal for Michigan in the short term. Sherrone Moore will do some recruiting, but not necessarily the nitty-gritty stuff where some of the sketchy stuff does happen. But at the end of the day, they're able to kind of put this behind them, focus on the sign-stealing scandal, which is the one everyone's kind of waiting for. But for the time being, it sounds like Michigan is at least on some steady waters. But the question now becomes, what does that look like for Jim Harbaugh? He is now in the NFL. He did not cooperate and made this a very famous case where he bought a kid a burger or something like that. But he had plenty of different things going on during this time. He had, they were going through a remarkable season and kind of dealing with all this, and it was wild. And then I think he kind of felt what was going on. I think he knew that the NCAA was going to come after him very aggressively after the season. So I think there was no doubt in my mind and in a lot of people's mind across the country that he was out of Michigan at the end of the year, and that's exactly what happened. He's now with the Los Angeles Chargers, and that makes this a little bit interesting. I'm not exactly sure what they can do to him while he's in the NFL. I'm not exactly sure if it's just going to be a fine, which is, pocket change for Jim Harbaugh. I don't know if it's something more aggressive. I have really no idea how this is going to unfold for Jim Harbaugh, just because he has no affiliation to the NCAA for the same, and it's the same reason why I'm sure when the NCAA called him a couple of times to get together and talk about this issue, he probably hung up on them and kept moving with his day. So it's really interesting to see this kind of unfold, I think. As it pertains to this Michigan team, it's kind of a non-story. I think there's going to be, obviously you don't want distractions around your team and all of that type of stuff, but it doesn't necessarily affect the team as it is right now, which is always a big thing for me when we go through these recruiting investigations, especially one like this where the majority of the people are gone from the program. I think punishing the kids especially is not necessarily the best way to go about business. So very happy they were able to avoid that in this case. Now all of the attention pushes towards that sign-stealing case, and I think that is probably the case that could get Michigan in a lot more trouble, to be totally honest with you, depending on what comes out. We already have some details about, how this was done and when it was done at certain places, but I'm sure we don't have the full story. There's no way we have the full story because it's got to be deeper than, just a couple of games where he was filming the other sideline. I think this was probably a bigger operation than we realized. There were probably a couple more people involved than we realized, and that will start to come to light here pretty soon, I think. I think that's the next one up, and Michigan, I'm sure, is trying to get that one behind them as quickly as possible, but also try to avoid as many penalties as they possibly can. Maybe they can follow kind of the same thing that happened here, where it's all those people that did those things are out of the program. We're a different program now, led by a different man, and we'll move forward that way. Who knows? Maybe they were able to pull that off. Maybe the NCAA is much more stringent. I don't know. I think if Jim Harbaugh was around, they would be a lot more stringent, to be totally honest with you. I think they are not big fans of Jim Harbaugh around the NCAA offices, and especially with him being so brazen about these couple of allegations, I think they are not very happy with him. But for the time being, I think Michigan's kind of in a spot where it's calm for the time being. It's going to be calm, at least here for a little bit, but there will be plenty of distractions around your team going into summer when they have to be working out on their own, and then into fall camp. There will be plenty around this Michigan team that has nothing to do with football, and it'll really kind of define the way that Sherrone Moore is going to look going forward. He's kind of thrown into the fire here in a time where it's never better to be the Michigan head coach, and also never worse because of all the craziness happening around him. But at the end of the day, if he can take this in stride, leave all the outside noise out and kind of field a team that is always ready to play the way Michigan has been for the past couple of years, I think people will forget about this pretty quickly, right? Winning heals everything, and that's just kind of the way things work. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle all this. It'll be interesting to see if the sign stealing scandal comes to a head fairly quickly. I'm sure Jim Harbaugh will give them the same response that he gave them on this one, which is pretty much a dial tone. But at the end of the day, there's still plenty of guys to interview. If they get Connor Stallions on a stand, I will be tuning in very closely to see what happens there. But at the end of the day, Michigan's, in a better spot than they were a day ago. I can say that pretty confidently. They left at least one of these things behind them and were able to kind of take the slight step forward that they absolutely needed to do. Now, the big battle is still ahead of them, obviously, but, you'll take the wins where you can get them if you're Michigan right now. So that'll be really interesting to watch. We will keep you updated on all of the happenings there. I'm not even sure if that is fully done with, just because I'm not sure what the recruiting restrictions will be and the details of that case, I think, still need to be kind of ironed out. But we'll keep you updated on all of the happenings around Michigan and all of their court cases, because there are quite a few. But we're going to take our last break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Kansas State Wildcats, do a little Spotlight Wednesday for you, and break down what Avery Johnson and the Wildcats can do in the Big 12 this upcoming year. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some of the Michigan punishments that have come down from those COVID-19 recruiting violations that were plenty. But we'll see how those develop, and obviously the sign stealing scandal that is coming up, I'm sure that case will be starting here pretty soon, so we will keep you updated with all of that. But now it's time to talk about the Kansas State Wildcats, and this is a team that I think a lot of people are watching, especially with the new Big 12 era that is starting without Texas and OU and all of the Big 12 teams coming, or Pac-12 teams, coming in. I think Kansas State has a great chance to make some noise this year. Now, them not playing a spring game makes this a little bit tougher, but, I'll give you what I know for the time being, and then maybe we'll revise this as the season goes on. But whenever you talk about Kansas State, it all starts with Avery Johnson. There's no two ways about that. He is the guy that makes this team special in a lot of ways. But I think there's so many great things about this team outside of Avery Johnson, but he is the difference maker. The guy right there is the person that will make this train go and will make them win a Big 12 title, take them to the playoff, give them a shot to really be the TCU of this year, kind of. And it'll be really interesting to watch as we go through it. But let's jump through this team kind of the way we have been for the last couple of weeks. We'll go offense, we'll go defense, and then we'll go through their schedule really quickly, and then some overall thoughts of what I kind of expect from this team and what they're capable of going into this year. But let's start with the offensive side of the ball. It's a really solid group, and it has been really since Chris Kleiman took over as head coach. Now, they do have some changes. They do have a new offensive coordinator in Connor Riley, who is the O-line coach for the past 6 years, before Colin Klein was hired at A&M, and they had to replace him. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of takes the reins there. Probably will be the play caller there, so it'll be interesting to see how he can kind of handles that and can put this team into action. Now, the great thing for him is you have a guy like Avery Johnson at quarterback. He is an absolute game changer. He's someone that can totally change the complexion of any game that you're in. He is apparently taken on the leader role much more this year. Obviously was behind Will Johnson for the majority of last year at least, and now is the guy all year round, 365 days a year. So he needs to be able to be that leader, be that vocal leader that they need, and he's been able to do that at least early on. Apparently his arm looks as incredible as his legs, which if you're someone that has watched him at all, you know just how special he is when he gets out of the pocket and is able to extend plays. As long as he's healthy, they're going to get big-time quarterback play. But the depth at that position is not necessarily as strong as you would hope. So maybe they're in the market for a quarterback in the portal. It'll be interesting to watch that develop. But the running backs is a solid group, but definitely could use some influx of some guys for sure. I think DJ Giddens is the experienced guy in that room. Definitely a very good running back. More of a power guy than kind of a breakaway speed type of guy, but definitely very talented, has had a ton of experience in that offense, and has done a lot of really, really good things for them throughout his time. Joe Jackson is another guy there. He's a backup at the as a redshirt freshman, and they could be looking for a guy in the portal here as well. So I think quarterback and running back are two positions where there's definitely some help to be had for sure, but at the end of the day, it'll be interesting to see what kind of happens with this group overall as we kind of go on throughout this time. I'm reading a comment over here about the Michigan court cases. I'd be very surprised if they took away their national title, but who knows? It'll be a lot of interesting things happening here down the barrel. But let's move on to wide receivers here for Kansas State, and this is an interesting group that's going to be relying big time on a big-time transfer, and that's Dante Cephas, a grad transfer from Penn State. He's going to have to be huge for them. He never really hit his stride at Penn State, never really got to the level that they were expecting from him, but Kent State was for real. He was just incredible on that team. He was all over the place. So if he can kind of find that again and get more comfortable in this offense as opposed to the Penn State one, then maybe he could blow up the way that Nittany Lion fans were really hoping for last year. And then you have Keegan Johnson and J.C. Brown on the outside who are kind of working their way into bigger roles as guys like Phillip Brooks finds his way out of the program, who is a very talented guy, was one of the most consistent guys in that wide receiver room and just the ultimate third down target. So huge for them as they kind of go through this. At tight end, it's kind of being held down right now by Garrett Oakley, and he's definitely a solid choice for them. Ben Sinnott is the guy that's walking out the door. He's very tough to replace. He was so important to their offense, both run and pass. I think Garrett Oakley is definitely up to the challenge. Is 6'5", 230, so a big guy that can definitely block, but they might need some help there as well. Will Swanson is another name to watch there, but it's going to be mostly a running offense, so not necessarily a ton of athletic ability or receiving ability needed, but it feels like they have a solid group that could use a little bit of help here and there. But the O-line, even though they do return Carver Willis, Hadley Panzer, and Taylor Portier, they are replacing 4 multi-year starters on this offensive line. Connor Beebe being the main among them. He was a huge-time player for them throughout the last couple of years, and replacing him is going to be very, very tough. They did add transfer Easton Kitley from North Dakota. They got a ton of other guys that can help them out. They have Andrew Lean Gang, Sam Hecht, and John Pastor. So a really solid group overall, a group that even though they're replacing so many guys, it feels like they have plenty of depth to kind of at least hold their own in the Big 12. They might want to go find the right guy in the portal here and there, but at the end of the day, overall a very solid group, which it usually is under Chris Kleiman, to be totally honest. But let's move on to the defense, and let's start with the D-line. The D-line is kind of a 3-4 front, if you're familiar. So 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers in this kind of formation. And it'll be really, or they kind of more play a 3-3-5, to be totally honest with you. But that means they use a nose tackle, which is Usu Siomalu. He's someone that just got back to practice this spring and apparently has looked really, really good. So he will likely be the starter at nose tackle. They have lost guys like Nate Matlack and Khalid Duke on the outsides, but they have Brendan Mott, Cody Stufflebean. They have tons of guys that are ready to step up and be big-time players. So I think edge rushing and defensive line has always been a really good strength for Kansas State throughout Chris Kleiman's time, and while there's not necessarily those big-time names that they might have had in the past, I think they still can do a ton of really, really good things. There's still tons of talent all over the field. They got Jordan Allen and Chidi Obiazor, I think, is someone that they're very excited about. They have so many guys that are just all over the place, so I think this is a group that is going to be rotating a ton. They're going to try to get as many fresh legs in there as possible because they don't necessarily have the down-in, down-out edge rusher, but they have plenty of guys that can contribute for sure. But let's move to what I consider to be the strongest part of this defense and the linebacker group. They're led by Austin Moore, an all-Big 12 second-team selection a year ago, and it's a really strong group. Desmond Purnell is right next to him, who was a Big 12 honorable mention a year ago, and then Jake Clifton, who's kind of working his way back from injury, but is a very talented kid that has a ton of ability, is right next to them. So there's a ton of talent, there's a ton of experience in this group, and I think this is the group that will really define this defense in a number of ways. They will not be able to run very well on them. All of these guys can play in coverage if they absolutely need to, so it'll be interesting to see this linebacker core kind of being the catalyst of this defense going forward. And then let's get to the back end. The corners are kind of an interesting group. I've talked about Jacob Parrish a little bit. I think he is comfortably the best of the bunch. I really like his game, and I think he's very talented. Now, Keenan Garber is a very solid player across for him. The problem is those are really the 2 guys that you look at, and then the rest is kind of So the depth definitely needs to be built out for them more and more as we go through these next couple of weeks. I could see them being very active in the portal pretty much across a ton of different positions, but especially corner and maybe safety, although safety feels a little bit more safe there. They did already get some help from the transfer portal. Jordan Riley, a transfer from Ball State, is someone that has been getting a ton of praise throughout spring and is going to be a big-time player for them. VJ Payne was 3rd on the team in tackles last year, and I think he's going to be a big player for them. I think this back end overall is relatively solid. They definitely could use some depth on that back end, but the front 5 is going to be a really solid group that is going to be hard to pass against, that's for sure. But it'll be interesting to see this defense kind of build out. I think there are so many positions where the top line looks really good and looks really strong, but the guys behind them just look like they're, a step behind, a step below. So it's definitely something that you'll be wanting to watch throughout this time. Who does Kansas State pick up? Do they fit the mold? Do they fit the positions of need? And can they elevate this team? Because I think this is already a very good team. I think this is already a team that could comfortably win 8 games or comfortably win 9 games. I think if they add the right guys in the portal, they could comfortably win 10 or 11 or win the Big 12 title and go to the playoffs. So there's a lot of big things that could happen over the next couple of weeks for them. But let's break down the schedule real quick here, and then we'll get into kind of my overall thoughts. So they start the season on October 31st against UT Martin. That's an easy win. I don't think there's any question about that. If it's not an easy win, then a lot of the rest of the season changes very quickly for Kansas State. But then they go to at Tulane, which is a very tough matchup. Then they go home and play Arizona on a Friday night. So it gets real very quickly. This is kind of a front-loaded schedule, to be totally honest with you. After Arizona, they go at BYU, which is a sketchy one in between Arizona and Oklahoma State, because Oklahoma State comes to town the very next week, and BYU is one of those teams that likely won't be a big-time team this upcoming year, but things always get very interesting in Provo when you have to go in and get a big-time win in between two games like Arizona and Oklahoma State. It can get sketchy pretty quickly. So a ton of the work will be done before that first bye. If they go into that first bye 5-0 and, seem to be rolling, they would comfortably be my betting favorites for the Big 12. And it'll be interesting to see what Utah does over that same amount of time because, as you see, they do not play each other, which is the very interesting part of this. We all kind of expect them to be the top two teams in the conference. They might just have to face off in Dallas at the end of the year, so it'll be interesting to watch that. But after the bye, they get at Colorado, which is a sketchy one just because of the talent level of Colorado. You don't really know what they'll look like by week 7, so it'll be interesting to watch that. At West Virginia is always a big-time atmosphere that they're going to have to be careful of, but should be able to win. But both of those games in general are games that if they drop them, I would not necessarily be surprised, and if they drop them, they better get very, very intentional about the way that they go about games going forward, because they can't drop a ton of games because of the way the Big 12 is going to shake out. It's going to be so tough, so crowded up at the top that I think losing maybe even 2 games might bury you in this new Big 12. But we'll see what happens there. Then they get Kansas at home, which is a huge one to get at home. And then Houston, at Houston, excuse me. I apologize for not putting that on there. But at Houston is the next game. That should be a win, but although with Willie Fritz coming in, he can do a number of big-time things against big schools. Obviously, knocked off USC when he was at Tulane, so I would be on the watch for that one before their last bye of the year. And then the final 3 are Arizona State at home, Cincinnati at home, before heading to Ames for a game at Iowa State. So all 3 of those should be doable games. Iowa State is a little bit sketchy. Arizona State has been building out that talent more and more, but all of those are very doable, and they should be able to win those games. So the schedule overall, when you come into the season and, Utah joins your conference and you don't have to play them, that's always a great thing, especially when you're a team that's vying for that spot in Dallas at the end of the year. It'll be really interesting to watch how this team kind of develops throughout the year, and is it kind of a collision course between them and Utah where they both are rolling through the Big 12 schedules and doing everything that we expected them to do, only for them to meet in Dallas for a spot in the playoff, which I think would just be incredible television. But overall thoughts on this team, I think when you look at this team, it is not a big variable team. You know what they have, you know the guys that they have, and especially you know the coach they have, and Chris Klieman and the staff that he's put together. They're going to be a solid team. They've been a solid team for a number of years now, and I expect that to continue at least as long as Chris Klieman is in the building. So it'll be really interesting to see how they kind of navigate through this schedule. Obviously, they don't have necessarily the injury history that someone like Utah has with Cam Rising, so that's a worry for them. You're not necessarily worried about getting as gutted as someone like Arizona might be over the next 2 weeks. So Kansas State's kind of in this steady position where they have a coach they all trust fully. They have players that want to be there day in, day out, and don't necessarily waver very much. And they have a fan base that seems to be growing and being more and more committed to this team. So I think everything is looking really, really good in Manhattan, Kansas. And I think overall, when you look at the two sides of the ball, there's a little bit to build out, right? Over the next couple of weeks, I think they'll be looking for rotational pieces. They'll be looking for guys at different positions. Wide receiver and running back are two that I'm watching, possibly even a backup quarterback being picked up. It's really just kind of building out depth for the most part, and they're going to have really good guys behind the ones, but at the end of the day, you really do need elite level players. If not only you want to win the Big 12, but if I know anything about Chris Kleiman and that program, they don't want to stop there. They want to be able to make noise in the playoff, and to do that, you have to be good 2 deep, you have to be good 3 deep. So I think this portal will be an interesting one for Kansas State, where I think they could be very active. I think they could sit totally still, and it could give you kind of an idea of what they think of their team. Do they think they have the depth necessary? Are they worried about that? But we'll find that out over the next couple of weeks, and this Kansas State team could look a little bit different, at least in terms of the foundation of this team. I think the top end will look a lot similar in the next 2 weeks, but there could be some players that come in that give them some big-time rotational pieces. To be totally honest, right now, I would have them at number 2 in the Big 12. I would have them behind Utah. I just think Cam Rising is a more consistent choice, as long as he's on the field, of course. It'll be really interesting to see what develops there, but in my opinion, Avery Johnson is the best player in the conference. I think he is the biggest difference maker in the conference. While Cam Rising might be the more stable choice, I think the ability of Avery Johnson far outweighs the ability of Cam Rising, and his ceiling is just pretty considerably higher, to be totally honest with you. So very excited for this team overall. Kansas State has the ability to become the team in the Big 12 this year. Everyone in the Big 12 right now is looking to kind of set their rubber stamp. Obviously, Kansas State won it only a couple of years ago, so they're the team that everyone's kind of watching, but Utah's coming in. There's tons of other teams that will have a viable choice at it, but whoever wins this is sitting at the top of the mountaintop for the Big 12, and who knows when you're going to be able to knock them down. So I think this is a huge year for Kansas State. It's a huge year for Utah. It'll be really interesting to see those two teams hopefully be battling out in Dallas, because I think that would be a remarkable matchup, to be totally honest with you. But really like this team overall. Need to patch some holes and then get things rolling, but the Big 12 is totally wide open, and they are the team that, in my opinion, might be the most steady choice, although I am leaning Utah because of their wide receiver talent and all of that type of thing. But the Wildcats have a chance to really grab the Big 12 by their throat, and it'll be really interesting to see them do that, because Chris Kleiman does not lose very often, but he's going up against Kyle Whittingham, who doesn't lose very often. So it'll be really interesting to see that battle unfold, especially with them not playing each other and kind of eyeing each other from a distance. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or X, TikTok, Instagram for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have people covering every sport in the world. We have so many people covering football. We have basketball, baseball, wrestling. We have a women's sports podcast that is coming out very soon that you guys should definitely check out. So if you need anything, just come over to GSMC and we have you covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired.